an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, Season 4, Episode 1. I Want to Be Here. In this episode, Rebecca she means well, which is one of those phrases that gets used by a lot of marginalized people to describe privileged rich white ladies. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Nicole for commissioning this episode. I am honestly really I'm pleased, but also surprised that there wasn't any voyeur episode booked for the finale of the last season or this episode, because so much happens. And don't get me wrong, guys, I'm not complaining about that. It's just the sort of thing where if there isn't a voyeur booked, it's not like I assume, oh, nothing happens this episode. But the monumental nature of how the last season ended seemed pretty shattering to me. And as I'm watching this one, I guess now that I can see how it's undone in a way, maybe it doesn't feel as shattering in retrospect when you're watching it. But nevertheless, I didn't know that at the time. And I'm just really not sure how I feel about the way this jumps ahead in the end rather than the beginning. Because what I thought we were going to do was jump to her in prison. And instead we get a, what is it called? Is it a recess when she's talking to the judge? The judge is going to sentence her. And she is not pleased with the manner in which Rebecca submitted her plea. She says, first of all, you were talking to your friend Paula here, not me, and you had your back to me most of the time. You didn't submit a plea so much as you made a speech. And overall, this just doesn't feel copacetic, and I'm going to need you to be a little bit more definite about what you're doing and demonstrate that you know what you're doing. And Paula, in a weird twist, she's the one here with Rebecca instead of Nathaniel. We don't see it happen, but Nathaniel apparently, after Rebecca entered her guilty plea, Nathaniel got up and left. And honestly, I have I have a lot of mixed feelings about the whole way this went down. Y'all know I'm not the biggest Nathaniel fan. And the thing that kills me is it's not even that he can't be done well. Him getting into this death wish thing, camp trip excursion, death wish survival excursion is entertaining in its way. But I just don't really care enough. And for us to have the on and off again thing happen again this episode, I really low-key hope that this is the off again for a while. Because I am tired. And this is tired. And I'm curious how many people were invested in this relationship. You guys, y'all are commissioning this when you're fans of this show. The first time you watched it, were you invested in whether or not Rebecca and Nathaniel wound up together? And no judgment if you were, because I am notoriously uninterested in romance as a plot device. That's just one of the quickest ways to make me irritated, is to feel like we keep circling back to something like that where people either don't have great chemistry or they just don't really make sense together. And with Rebecca and Nathaniel, we ended the last, she kept putting him off last season, and it felt like such growth for her and such a good idea. And I felt like it felt really quick that her therapist started to be like, but you do enjoy happiness and you could be in a relationship and you deserve to be happy. And I think that part of that problem is that we weren't with her throughout the months that apparently passed while she was in therapy. And so for us, it doesn't feel like much time has passed, you know? And never mind the fact that the actual like main time jump with Heather's pregnancy, that happens while Rebecca's sleeping with Nathaniel. That isn't like, that's not like a time jump between her saying, I am interested in him and then rejecting him. So I'm just going to jump ahead real quick and sort of deal with that, because the idea of this like trip that he takes, is, as he puts it to George, part of the way he copes with things being, I go to extremes. I need a hard reset, I think is what he said at one point. And it's moments like this where I'm very uncomfortable because I see myself in Nathaniel a little bit. I can be a person of extremes, and it's something that I've been really working on over the past few months. Especially, it's something I've been working on for the past couple of years, but the past few months I've been much more intense about really trying to not go from one end of the spectrum right to the other. It's like, I saw this meme the other day that was like, some days I spend 4 hours in the gym and drink a smoothie. Other days I sit on the couch and eat pizza and don't move. It's called balance. And I was like, I know you're trying to be funny, but the problem is that people do think of doing those two things as balance. And they're not. They're literally polar opposites on a spectrum of complete extremes that are unsustainable and unhealthy. It's the sort of thing that when you don't know what balance looks like, that sounds like it's right to you, you know? And that's the sort of meme that I would have like really felt like that spoke to me. Oh yeah, that's how I am. And not really thought about the fact that really speaks to me as much as it does is a bit of a red flag to the fact that I don't know how to like function on an even keel without throwing myself completely into a new thing, or like basically putting a complete stop to another thing. And just Nathaniel he has that sort of like, I need to wipe the slate completely clean. He doesn't even consider that this is something that he can work through. For him, it's just, nope, that's it. I'm done, moving on. And I really understand. I really get that. And it's like really hard to watch a character do this and it be like so accurately made fun of, and just realize like how unhealthy this is, you know? So George winds up coming through because George says that the guy in 27 Hours was like his old boss or something, and he wasn't there for him, and he's not going to let that happen to Nathaniel. So he shows up and basically like follows Nathaniel playing ska, which there is no more comical form of music, I don't think, than ska. It's just when you start playing it during any scene, it's gonna feel silly. It really will. And the fact that George is super into ska is such a weird little character detail that I think I love. And I never want it to I want this to be a thing now. So eventually, George tells him that Rebecca was let out, and Nathaniel goes to see her. And he wants to take her to Hawaii to forget the whole thing and just get to be together. And the fact that she isn't immediately willing to go with him really upsets him. And he basically says, every time we have a chance to be happy together, you ruin it. And I don't understand why you can't stop overthinking things. And it's one of those, it's actually a really great example of what it's like to be dealing with your own issues in a way that your partner doesn't. This felt extremely familiar to me. The first time that I was engaged, I was in a relationship with an alcoholic who was unwilling to admit he was an alcoholic, a workaholic as well. He was more willing to admit that. And he had really big issues for dealing with trauma from his childhood. And I began to investigate some of my own habits and tendencies. I wasn't going to therapy yet, but I was like beginning to read self-help books. I was going to like OA meetings, which, highly questionable, but it's the baby step towards starting to realize like I have some shit I need to deal with. And he was really discouraging about all of this stuff, which is also coincides with around the time that I began to put a lot of weight on, because he was really like dismissive of me going to the gym and doing and eating healthy food, because he didn't like the fact that I was working on myself and trying to change myself in a lot of ways, when he knew he also had things to work on and he wasn't really interested in looking at that. And that's what it feels like is partially happening with Nathaniel. I think what Rebecca is dealing with, I think that it's like he's framing it as, you aren't letting us be happy. But I think there's a bit of a threat to him in there, where he's beginning to think like, if she's super aware of her own shortcomings and stuff, how am I going to live up to that? Also, she's talking about her privilege, and like, you don't get a lot more privilege than Nathaniel, what's his name? Plimpton. I mean, it's a difficult thing when somebody begins to make a realization about some things that feel like they also apply to you, and you're not ready for that conversation or that thought, that line of thought. And also, it's so expected that in relationships, when you say that you love somebody and when you are agreeing that you're going to be in this with somebody, everything else in your life takes a back seat and the relationship comes first. And it's like just so expected in a way that's actually really fucked up when you stop and think about it. We fully go into things with an attitude that like, if you're not putting me first, then why are we even doing this? And really, we need to examine that a lot more as a culture. It's part of what has like bred several generations of women, especially, who put their partners before themselves. And I don't think it's an accident that Nathaniel is sort of asking Rebecca to sideline her concerns and her feelings of like realization about what her life is like in favor of just doing what he wants. It's like he's saying, why won't you just let us be happy? And the thing is, there's nothing about what she's saying here that precludes you to being happy, Nathaniel. You came at her with reservations you had already made and didn't ask her about them, and had an expectation for no reason. Let's be honest. You hadn't talked to her in weeks. And then you just roll up with tickets to Hawaii. And yeah, she's relieved, but also, what the fuck, dude? And then you get mad that she doesn't immediately bend to your will when you have not been there for her during a terrible portion of her life. Like, this is probably going to go down as some of the worst weeks of her life. So yeah, the whole thing is just, it's really frustrating. It feels really real in its way. The way that he blurts out that she always tries to ruin it, and how hard that clearly hits her, and how much he realizes after he said it that that was the wrong thing to say, unfair and also not true. And yet he can't quite bring himself to apologize because it's genuinely how he feels. It's just, it's well done, you know? This is the thing about self-improvement. And I have grown to understand this a little bit more, is as you begin to embark on it in a serious way, you start to realize that some of the worst parts of what you did or who you were encouraged or even created by some of the people around you. And you have to decide whether or not you want to keep them in your life and whether it's worth fighting that battle all the time, or whether you just need to kind of cut your losses because they're not going to be with you as you update your behavior. And I mean, there's still a possibility that, Megan says I disappeared. Sorry guys if I did. It looks like I'm fine from my end. But this is like part of why over the past like several years, a lot of people, especially with like the political climate that we're in right now, and with all of the human rights issues we're dealing with, people are beginning to realize that they have tried to make the progress in terms of their like biases and stuff and become better people, but their friends aren't willing to make those same changes or admit that they have advantages. And when somebody doesn't face that, and you know it to be true, and you see the evidence around you, there's only so long that you can continue with like humoring them or hoping they'll see the light. So maybe Nathaniel will realize the way he came at her was unfair and very demanding, but I'm a little bit worried about it. Just because I don't really want this to be about the two of them anymore. You know, I want this to just go back to being Rebecca, like coming to terms with how she's treated people and the ways in which she has gone through her life, expecting things to just work out for her. And they have often just worked out for her. And she was saying, you know, when she had that meeting with her therapy group in home base, she says, like, is it just that I'm smarter than everyone? It's like, white women are master manipulators. They just are. Like, and in some ways, that is a byproduct of patriarchy, because white or not, women in a lot of cultures historically have not been allowed to speak their mind. So in order to get what they want, they have had to manipulate because they can't simply demand things. They will not be heard. White women are so effective because of their whiteness. So they are able to manipulate in a much more obvious and brazen way and still get away with it because everybody is willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. And that just doesn't really like come up in that conversation because at the time I just figured that wasn't going to be part of the conversation. And, you know, I didn't really expect it to be. I kind of was like, that's not really what this seems to be about right now. There's a lot of layers to everything and you can't possibly get into every single thing. But I really appreciated that this episode did get into it after all. Rebecca, when she's talking to Paula is shockingly telling Rebecca, you can't go to prison. Oh my God, what are you doing? I was really surprised because as Rebecca says, we exchanged a nod and a knowing smile. What do you mean? But Paula is like, you know, she is understandably taking a much more practical approach to this whole thing where she's just like, do you know what that means for you? Like really what that would do to your life. And Rebecca, it's really interesting how they have this work out because the end of the last episode, I honestly was like pleased with her decision that she was going to take responsibility. As much as this didn't feel like the thing to take responsibility for, because she was being charged with like attempted murder, and that's not actually what happened. The truth of the matter is we don't always get to choose the moment when we are held responsible for a thing. It's sort of like crying wolf. And okay, the third time there actually is a wolf, but you cried wolf a bunch of times already, and so nobody's listening, and that's how it happens. So part of me was just like, Rebecca didn't get held responsible for those other things, and she isn't actually guilty of this the way they're behaving, but she did pull some shit, and she's not innocent. So maybe this is kind of like the thing. At the same time, it doesn't actually help anybody, and that is what becomes the crux of the issue. Especially when she's talking to Valencia and Heather when they come for the visit later. What Rebecca is doing here is trying to do an easy mode of, as she calls it, penance. She feels that she wants to make things right. And she does mean it, but she has an incredibly superficial and self-centered understanding of what making things right actually even means. Everything about her attempt here to go to jail and suffer through this 6 weeks, I think it is, the judge gives her, because the judge is getting irritated with her finally and is like, fine, you know what? Go, I'm sentencing you to 6 weeks and then we'll have your fucking hearing. Which, I have to say, sidebar, it's bonkers to me that a judge could do that. Is that just me? The fact that a judge can just be like, I don't like your attitude. Prison for 6 weeks until I decide to give you a hearing is insane. The fact that you can just be, and I know, the whole episode, a lot of it is about, the justice system and the way that, privilege works within it. But that kind of ability to simply I don't like your tone, I'm locking you up for that, is a kind of power that I fail to keep in mind is still wielded commonly everywhere in the country. It is not. I think of that sort of thing as being reserved for feudal systems. And the fact that you could literally just be like, I didn't like the way you acted out there, so I'm a make you wait for your hearing, and we're going to do this later. I really oh God. Erica says, I don't know if that's a real thing, but I feel like they would have checked if this was a real thing. Yeah, Erica, I have heard of this before. Not necessarily this exact thing, but over the past couple of years, I've been doing a lot more reading on the way that certain things shook out, because I am trying to find details about the way the justice system works for white people versus black people, or people of color in general, but black people especially in a lot of ways. And there are a lot of instances where it's handled this way, where it's just up to the whim of whomever the judge is and their mood for the day. And they will absolutely just be crushing because they had a bad day or they just don't like this person. And I just find it so questionable that that's available as a tool at all. And in this case, it makes sense because you can see that the judge can tell Rebecca doesn't get it. What she's asking. Her plea of guilty is coming from a place of such privilege and ignorance that the judge is aware that this is not how, her plea of guilty is coming from this sort of immediate panic and stubbornness that is not actually rooted in a helpful attempt to make things better. She seems to see through it. And I think this is her attempt to kind of scare Rebecca out of it and bring her back to her senses. But unfortunately, she underestimates just how stubborn Rebecca is, because we see the sequence of her being brought into the prison and her having to squat and cough and her chanting to herself, I deserve this, the entire time. And I feel like when you are as stubborn as Rebecca, holding on to something like that, it can make it seem like you're doing the right thing or you're in the right place, even though all the evidence around you really doesn't seem to support that theory. And we get her bunkmate is the actress who, from Glow, I can't remember, I don't know her name, I don't think. But she's the big girl who was like the daughter of a wrestler and had like huge brothers and everything. And she is delightful. I was very excited to see her. Erica says her cellmate was one of the kids from summer camp from season 1. Oh, I had seen her. Okay. So that's funny. Apparently Rebecca does not recognize her because it's not mentioned, but that's still pretty fun. And her cellmate, like, Rebecca is trying to tell herself at this point that she deserves this, but she still is crumpled up on the bed crying to herself and literally asks her cellmate to comfort her. And if that isn't the most white woman moment, that was when I started to be like, oh, I think I see what they're doing here. Because, you know, her cellmate is definitely like disadvantaged based on the story and also a woman of color. So this like white woman who's chosen to be here weeping and asking this woman for comfort is really good. It's a very good moment. So Rebecca is Brittany Young. Thank you, Matt. Rebecca is trying to figure out what her penance is going to be because she's convinced that this is like a fucking summer camp for her somehow. And it's like she's trying to do like a apology boot camp or something. Just, girl, just like try and be better. What are you doing? And she finds out that there's like this theater class and gets really excited because, as we know, she has that history. Guys, look, I know I've talked about this before, but I just have to say, I really appreciate Rachel Bloom being able to make fun of herself as a theater kid. Being a theater kid is one of those things that when you have been around those types of people, it is so distinct. And for me, so incredibly uncomfortable and frustrating. I was in the theater business for a time. And part of the reason I got out of it was because I hated theater people. And I'm not trying to be a dick. It's not like they're all just terrible people. It was that they had a way of living in the world that grated on my nerves so badly. And just, oh God, I will, the way that she talks in this episode about the different shows and she brings up Pippin, and it's just like, I have had these exact conversations. And what's so frustrating was, for me, I was more like Paula, where I didn't know about any of this stuff despite being in the class with them. You know, when you're a theater kid, you have to have the ability to see these shows a lot of the time. Much of the time, being a theater kid goes along with having privilege of some kind, because it's an expensive pastime that requires classes a lot of the time, or your school requires the funding to be able to pay for, plays to be put on, performances. And sometimes you need voice lessons if you're going to be doing musical theater. And then there's the actual going to the shows. And I did not grow up with that kind of money. So most of the kids that were theater kids around me knew all of these shows that I had never even heard of. And they had been to them more than once. And they just had this lived experience with theater that I not only didn't have, but didn't want either. It was just of no interest to me. And that was part of what began to sink in and make me realize, oh, okay, It's not just that I don't fit in, but I don't want to fit in. This isn't something that I even aspire to know about. This isn't for me. I'm not interested in like expanding my knowledge in this area. So why am I here? And Rebecca choosing to like take this whole thing over and try and turn it into a moment of singing this song from South Pacific. Oh God, she's so incredibly pushy. Again, so self-centered. It is really awful to realize how she swoops in and makes it all about her. And I'm delighted that the people are willing to come out later and just be like, we did not like that. We didn't like that song. The whole thing felt fucking goofy. You just like came in and decided on how we were going to do things, and we liked it the way it was. And despite the fact that they're telling her this, Rebecca is still like talking over all of them, and eventually they just have to like completely shut that shit down. And it ruins what her idea of her penance was going to be. And the way that they shut it down, the way it's done is so good, because she's not hearing them when they're just using words to say, we're not interested. So we get this version of the cell block tango, which is just genius, you guys. I loved it so much. They've got their like black lingerie over their orange jumpsuits, which just looks so funny. Details like that. Oh my God. Rashawn is just killing me. She just sent me like 11 texts in a row. Rashawn, if you're listening to this, this was that day where you sent me 11 texts in a row. And she wants these women to tell their sordid tales of how they wound up in jail. And it is so beautifully done. This is really good stuff. It's, Erica says, one of my least favorite songs in the series. I always skip it when listening. I mean, yeah, it's like, it's certainly not a song that's entertaining after you get through like what the point of the song is. There's really no need to listen to it again. It's not a fun song, but what they did here was so good, because Rebecca is trying to make this into like a almost empowering moment, and empowering to her, BT dubs, but she's acting like it's going to be empowering to them too, even though she hasn't got any idea what they're going through. And she finds out slowly how each of them wound up here. And one of the women, her boyfriend had meth in her car, and the cops found it. And Rebecca's like assuming that she like got revenge on her boyfriend. But it's like, no, she loves her boyfriend. The fact that she like went to jail for him is just like something that happened. She's not going to snitch. They have a kid together. They can't both be in prison. Another woman stole a sweater because they turned the heat off in her apartment. And there's this amazing, when the other white woman asks, how much time did you get? I also stole a sweater and I got 2 months. The black woman says 3 years. And y'all, I know that it's like, it's a punchline in its way. And I'm not saying the show's treating it disrespectfully, but God, that is one of those like lines that you literally feel like tears well up as soon as you kind of like chuckle at the reveal. You're just like, oh my God, this is where we live. This is where we live. It's like the whole thing with Felicity Huffman, you know, and getting her kid into a school by cheating. And she got, a couple months? Meanwhile, there was a black woman who lied about where her address was to get her child into a better school district. And I think she got 10 years. I'm pretty sure she got about a decade. It might have been longer. But it was definitely in the years, plural. And it is so blatant and so obvious and so disgusting that when people continue to try and deny that this is like the reality of the world, it's just impossible to continue to take them seriously as people. So Rebecca, as she's hearing each of these stories, she keeps trying to like bring it up and get the energy up again and make it fun. But it's slowly getting chipped away at with each new story and revelation about the situation that these women are in. One of these women got like a text that her daughter was in the hospital and got so distracted that she hit a kid and he died. And now she's in jail. And just a terrible accident. You know, it's one of those things that's like everybody who hears about it will say she shouldn't have been texting and driving. And there is very little empathy for somebody's situation in just making a mistake. Like, it's the same as like stories about parents that leave their kids in the car and forget that they're there. Yeah, it might seem inexplicable that they forgot their child was in the car, but I have straight up forgotten or done things that I can't believe as I catch myself and realize that I was about to do that incredibly dangerous or incredibly thoughtless thing. And I just happened to catch myself for some reason. It's luck. A lot of the time it's luck, you know, and we can be really absolutist about who deserves to be in jail because they did a bad thing and that's where they should be. And I'm not trying to say that there aren't some people who deserve to be there. We love as human beings, we love feeling better than other people. And there is nothing quite like judging the actions of prisoners to make us feel like we're the ones making the right smart choices for our lives. It just gives a lot of people such a high to feel like I might be doing badly, but at least I'm not like them. I'm not a bad person. I'm not a thoughtless person. I'm not selfish or cruel or, you know, trying to take things that aren't mine. And there's just so little experience backing that kind of attitude, usually. So little thought. And Rebecca really just sort of dwindles. As she's hearing these stories, she begins to shrink on herself and realizes how this isn't fun. These stories aren't fun. And she finally decides that she's going to tell her story in the way that she expected them to tell theirs. And when she gets to the end and tells them that she pled guilty and they tried to convince her not to, but she did anyway, and she's here because she deserves it. And they all realize that she chose this. They all get rightfully really angry and get up and leave. And it's a really nice parallel, actually, to what's going on with Josh. Because Josh decides to do that thing where you take an online quiz about mental health and take that shit really fucking seriously. So Josh goes to this terrible website. I can't remember what it was. It was like Quimbo or something. And he takes a test because he starts to be certain while speaking to Hector that he has some sort of disorder himself. And that's why all of these things have gone right over his head throughout his whole life. And I love Hector just being like, maybe you're just incredibly self-absorbed and unobservant and just a little bit dense in general. And he's like, no. I have a disorder. Erica says Quimble Pop. I forgot. Oh, wow. That is such a good name. Oh, is there a Quimble Pop out there? Did anybody buy that domain? I should check. But so what Josh decides he's going to do is take this test and then absolutely take it as gospel that he has every single disorder that it tells him he has. And I love the conversation with him and Heather and Hector. First of all, the test about like Sex and the City characters comes up several times. And that's one of those that I have never gotten the same answer more than once whenever I've taken those. I don't know what I am. I would guess that I'm like a Miranda Samantha combo, but I don't know. Heather finally just tells him, you don't have any of those disorders. And he's like, well, how do you explain the fact that I do this? And lists a bunch of stuff off to her. And she's like, you just listed the beers in the bar and you used to work here. That's how you know what those are. And this is something that I think all of us can fall prey to. We want a way to deal with ourselves. We have our quirks that we begin to get really fucking tired of. And we're like, I need a way to cope with this bullshit that I do. And then somebody's like, well, maybe you have such and such. And you feel like, it's like, you know, Rebecca singing her diagnosis. You think this is the thing. I can now deal because I have a very specific label for what I do and why I do it. And it feels like somebody's just given you this like amazing tool. But the thing is that sometimes you do all of this stuff because you just have like something super not fun to deal with, like generalized low-level anxiety, which really is not super meaningful. When there's nothing like really acutely going on, it's just, you're kind of a mess in the way that most people are kind of a mess. Join the club, like, congratulations. And when they say to him that he doesn't have any of this, and Heather says to him, it feels like you're just, like there are people who genuinely suffer from these disorders. And it feels like you're just trying these on, like you're trying to find an identity, and it's kind of gross. This is what a lot of people have a problem with regarding people like labeling themselves with disorders online. And one of the biggest ones is claiming that they are like OCD. And this is something that I haven't been diagnosed with, but I did have a therapist who agreed that I probably do have OCD. But I have never been officially diagnosed. And so it's one of those things that I'm like, likely. I call myself likely OCD, but I am not in a position where I need to be medicated. It's inconvenient, but it's not crippling. It's not to a point where it feels like it's interfering with my life. It can just make me like difficult as a person to cope with. But there are so many people who are like pulling out of various like WebMD articles and stuff some vague, very vague symptoms or tendencies, and claiming that this is evidence that they have like a disorder of some kind. And it is really hard to listen to people who are trying to figure things out and telling you the things like Josh does, where it's just general shit that everybody does. And they're like, well, you know, I get sucked into my phone all the time. I think I have ADD. And it's like, look, I'm not trying to say ADD isn't a genuine thing. Owen has ADD. Brennan had ADD. I know what it's like to like watch somebody suffer from that. It's real. But just because you have a tendency to open Facebook a little too much, Karen, maybe just chill. Maybe it's not OCD. Maybe you just need to delete the Facebook app off your fucking phone for a few days. Chill. So this whole thing is just, it's really similar to Rebecca, where it's like, he doesn't need to identify with any of these disorders. This is just something that he is choosing to take on because he feels like this will be the answer for him personally, with no respect as to whether or not that's a genuine issue and no interest in getting a professional opinion on it. Because Heather suggests that he goes to therapy and gets some help. And he's just like, no, Quimblepop has a lot of really good articles and they're free. And that's all I need. And, you know, if it isn't acute enough an issue for you that you feel the need to seek out professional help, then maybe it's not a disorder. And that's not to say if you can't afford to go see a doctor, because that's a real fucking thing. That's the main reason I've never been diagnosed, is you need to like see. I was seeing a student psychologist, and she did not have the capacity to diagnose me in any way. That would be expensive. There's money needed for that. Josh, that's not the problem that he cites. He just doesn't want to. And he says, and these are free, but not in the sense like I couldn't afford it. It seems more like I just don't want to spend the money. And eventually he does come around and decide that he is going to go and see Dr. Mancopian. Guys, Dr. Mancopian. Can we just take a moment to like love that name? Oh God, I found that so fucking funny. And the doctor just basically tells him, you don't have any of that. You're just going to need to start to like deal with the fact that you have some bad coping mechanisms and really bad habits and some like viewpoints that you need to maybe begin to readjust, and some patterns that are kind of unfortunate that you're going to need to begin to iron out. And it's going to take years, and it's going to be hard. And this is the very kind of thing that Josh was not interested in, because that's part of the problem. You want the easy mode. That's what Rebecca's here for with prison. She doesn't want the long, slow slog of proving yourself daily to people by constantly showing up and always trying to be better. She wants to be able to do the 30-day boot camp and then come out on the other side and be like, I did it. See, I was sorry. And I just showed you that. That's not how that goes. And it shouldn't be how it goes. That's nothing. That's not a sustained change. I mean, I think there is like a saying that's an apology that is not followed by changed behavior is not an apology. If you apologize and continue doing that same shit you did, you're not sorry. You just found it inconvenient that somebody else was upset by it. You know? So Rebecca has her meeting with Paula. She meets with Paula a couple times, and Paula just can't understand why Rebecca is resisting getting out of prison. And there is a point when she just says that, I don't understand. And Rebecca gives her this kind of sad look and says, no, you don't. And I feel like that isn't followed up on in that moment. And I wanted it to be, because if she says, no, you don't, and she says it in that scene, I think she's with Paula and Heather and Valencia. And she says, no, you don't, to all of them. And it really felt in that moment like she felt very alone, which ties into the song a little bit later about being, feeling alone. I can't remember what the lyrics are, but it's a really great song about how like unique and special your situation is, and the fact that you feel alone in a way that nobody else could possibly understand. Meanwhile, everybody else is singing the same song. I was actually talking about something like this with my mother today. My mother is an odd duck, and she often has trouble fitting in places. Partially, I think, because she tends to hang back and look for a place to fit, which a lot of people do. I am not like that. I show up and I make a space for myself, and then if people want to come to me, then all is hunky-dory. But I'm here, and that's that. So not fitting in used to be a bummer to me. It used to feel like, nobody gets it, man. Why am I not fitting? And then I began to realize, like, why do I need to fit? I'm just here to do the thing. If I don't, quote, fit, does that actually affect anything that I'm doing here? And a lot of times, the answer to that is no, it doesn't actually matter. It can be frustrating personally, but sometimes you just kind of have to let go of that and be patient and let things play out, because being in a group setting with a lot of people, the first impression you get of how that group works is almost never indicative of how it actually is with those people. So my mother had just joined this, it's like this religious sort of retreat, like an online retreat. And the group that she's been meeting with on Zoom it's a lot of like grad students, even some PhDs, very educated in a way that my mother isn't. And she found them either intimidating or just outright pretentious at times with their attitudes and the way that they spoke, which, as somebody who did not finish college, but was surrounded by friends who at least finished grad school, if not, went on and got other degrees, I know that feeling. And she was like on the verge of kind of wanting to give up. And I sort of told her what my attitude has been over the past couple of, the past decade really, which is the only way that you're going to get through this feeling like you don't fit is to be aggressively yourself and then see who comes to you and who gravitates towards the energy you're putting out. You can't force yourself into a space that might not even be there, especially if it's a space right up next to a person that you find pretentious and unpleasant to be around. Then you don't want to be in that space. It's not just that you don't fit, you don't want to fit, and that's fine. And I feel like there's something about the way that Rebecca says you don't understand that she really seems to believe that she has a life experience going on right now that none of her friends can relate to at all. And I'm curious whether that's actually true. This is, of course, an extreme circumstance. How many of them have had to go to jail? Probably none of them. Nevertheless, it feels like this deep regret and feeling of shame that she clearly has, this is not unique. That's the whole point of that song. And she's not explaining to them that that is how she feels. She's just assuming they don't understand because probably she hasn't actually articulated to herself what she's feeling and doesn't know how to tell them how frustrated she is. And I just really I found it really understandable, but also frustrating that she does not try and engage with them on that level and explain what's going on. She just digs her heels in about staying in jail. And again, I think that's part of the easy mode. She can stay in jail and do a thing without actually having to examine anything, without actually having to be vulnerable and admit, I have so much regret. I feel so terrible and I don't know how to make it right. So finally, they come back and tell her that Trent woke up and he confessed everything. We find out later that Paula, he was faking his coma. And Paula stands over him and tells him that if he doesn't wake up, if he doesn't stop pretending to be asleep really, she is going to call Princeton and have them revoke his degree. To which he immediately wakes up and says, actually, I went to school in Boston. And it's such a great callback because this is what I love about Trent specifically, is that on paper, him and Rebecca are the perfect couple. It's of course they should not be together, but damn, they definitely have so much in common in so many ways and would make an excellent pair if they could each just be human beings. So she gets him to wake up. Now, Rebecca never finds out that Paula did that. She doesn't realize that that's like how things went down there. It just seems like an act of God. But even so, she doesn't really want to leave. And when she finally gets like, when she's talking to her friends at the time, they finally, I think it's Valencia or maybe it's Heather who says, staying in prison is not going to change the fact that you are a rich white lawyer lady. Doing this doesn't help you. It doesn't help anybody else. It doesn't make things right. It doesn't do anything. This is purely like symbolic for your ego or something. When she gets home, there's a point at which she says everything I do is wrong by definition because of my privilege. Which is just like, no, that's not really what that means. But also, Valencia snaps at this point and basically tells her, it's great that you're recognizing that privilege, but also you need to shut the fuck up and put your money where your mouth is. And if you don't put your money where your mouth is, then I frankly just don't want to fucking hear it anymore. Which, amen, sister. Oh my God. I cannot tell y'all how many, quote, allies I have known who, when it came down to the wire, did not follow through with any of the shit that they claimed they would be there for. And it, you know, there are limits that we all have. There's, you know, not everybody can do everything. I really wanted to get involved with like the protests that were going down earlier this year, but I don't have a car and I don't live near a city. But basic shit. I had been Facebook friends and had a listener who constantly was like acting like they would get in the mix if anything ever went down. And especially like they were also friends with Rashawn, always talking about how if you ever need me to back you up on anything, I will be there, lady, and just tag me. And then something actually went down. But the person at fault was that woman's close friend. And all of a sudden, she had nothing to say. And completely did an about face and accused both me and Rashawn of lying. And basically, like, removed herself completely from our spheres and from the podcast community, even though she was one of our biggest cheerleaders, simply because it came down to the wire and it was her friend and she did not have the stones to like actually face the fact that she was friends with somebody who was being shitty and not standing up for marginalized people at all and just outright cowardly. And that is the kind of shit that people of color are super used to seeing and dealing with all the time, is people talking a talk and really like acting as if they get it. But when it comes down to actually doing anything materially that's inconvenient or uncomfortable, they balk immediately, don't want to make waves, don't want to make things weird. And, you know, there are points where you get that. You have a job, and there are times where there are people that you can make waves with at your job. And then there are people that you know that's not how that's going to go. And you have to choose. Are you willing to take that risk anyway or no? Are you willing to stand up for somebody or no? And sometimes you're not going to like your own answer. But you've got to be honest about what those answers are. And you've got to just like, you can't just self-flagellate. That's not helpful. And I think that in recent years, it has become more and more at the forefront of the conversations about how white people can be allies, because for a long time, it was just a series of white people coming to understand their privilege, beginning to realize what that meant. And it was almost immediately followed up by, I'm so sorry. I apologize on behalf of all white people. This sort of like nothing phrases that they think are making a really big statement, but are not actually practically of any value. And you got to actually do something. You've got to actually risk something, or else it doesn't mean anything and you don't actually believe in it. And that's hard. and it's scary and it's uncomfortable and it's like low-key dangerous depending on the situation. And you just have to come to terms with that. And it's not something that a lot of people are able to do right away, if ever. But I really like the fact that when it comes down to it, Rebecca has a choice between pursuing this or going to Hawaii with Nathaniel and continuing to pursue this romance. And it's not even a question for her. He wants to take her to Hawaii. And of course she has the immediate response of fuck yeah, let's go. But it's followed up with immediate, oh wait, no, I can't do that. My bad. And when he starts to cop attitude with her, there's not even a moment where it feels like she might cave or that she's considering what he's saying. It's immediately her going, oh, you don't get it. It's really, that's growth to be you mean a lot to me. I really do care about you. However, your attitude right here is indicative of us having completely different priorities right now. And that's a big deal in a relationship. If you guys aren't on the same page with that sort of thing, if Owen, for example, wasn't as leftist as he is, there's no way we would have been staying together. I need somebody who is as rabid as I am in that regard. That's just something about your basic values that a partner needs to be able to share. Maybe Nathaniel will get there. Maybe he won't. But honestly, who cares? This is not about him. So, and it makes sense. The last episode was called Nathaniel is Irrelevant. I wish he was a little bit more. So the episode ends with Rebecca going back to the jail and, offering free legal services and agreeing to completely not get involved with the theater class aspect of anything. She is just going to be here to try and offer assistance, despite the fact that she is a real estate lawyer. She's going to educate herself on criminal law a little bit more and try and help these women in that respect. And that I think is wonderful. I really loved that. And I'm super interested to see if any of those stories come up in the episodes or if that's going to be sort of a separate thing that we don't see that much of. So I'm going to wrap up, but thank you guys again so much for listening to the episodes. And thank you to Nicole for commissioning this one. I hope y'all are enjoying the coverage. I can't believe this is the final season. It is, right? There's not 5. It's been going on for so long. It feels like it's sort of like Veronica Mars in some ways, where I'm just this is part of the Spoil Me lineup. And when it's gone, it's going to feel really strange. But yeah, guys, thank you again so much. And I hope you're hanging in there because it's day 3 of election day. We're almost there, kids. We're almost there. Hold on tight. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.